a global infrastructure project involving over 150 nations, a vision promising new airports, modern motorways, and world-class seaports. It was the blueprint for future Dubai and Singapore. Yet, in many of the countries that embraced it, these mega-projects now stand unfinished, their grand dreams shattered. Some nations are drowning under a tsunami of debt, while others are left with nothing but derelict ruins. This was the promise of China's most expansive global megaproject, the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. Once universally hailed as the project of the century, it is now increasingly branded a geopolitical disaster. The greatest casualties of this grand ambition are the very developing nations that were lured by its sweet, seductive promises. But what exactly went wrong? Why is the global community now pointing fingers at a superpower like China? Welcome back to Deep Dive Diaries. Today, we dissect the rise and fall of the BRI. The journey began in 2013 when Chinese President Xi Jinping unveiled the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, an initiative immediately lauded as the greatest plan of the century. Its declared goal was to build a modern Silk Road, an intricate network of railway lines, highways, and ports designed to seamlessly connect Asia, Africa, and Europe. China presented this as a benevolent mission to guide developing nations toward economic development and establish China as a responsible, visionary global leader. This staggering vision captured the world's imagination, drawing expressions of interest from over 140 countries. Many financially strapped nations quickly rushed to secure loans from Beijing, desperate for the investment required to modernize their aging infrastructure. The global excitement was palpable. It felt like a paradigm shift in international relations. Before the decade was out, China had committed an eye-watering $1.2 trillion to BRI projects across the globe. It is vital to understand the source of this funding. This money was distributed not as aid or grants, but as sovereign loans. These loans were extended specifically to countries that Western banks or the IMF, International Monetary Fund, had previously refused to finance, labeling them as too high risk due to their unstable financial or political situations. China stepped into this perceived vacuum, appearing to be the only nation willing to take the risk, thereby gaining immense leverage. It didn't take long for the true nature of the BRI to emerge. It was not merely an altruistic infrastructure drive, it was a deeply ingrained geopolitical and economic agenda engineered to serve China's domestic needs above all else. At the time, China was facing a serious overcapacity crisis. Its decades of breakneck industrial growth had resulted in its factories churning out a massive surplus of materials, steel, cement, glass, and construction equipment, far exceeding domestic demand. Furthermore, the Chinese education system was graduating millions of engineers and skilled laborers annually, creating a workforce that the domestic economy struggled to absorb. The BRI offered a brilliant twofold solution: export the surplus capacity and the surplus labor. The strategic plan was simple: lend money to developing countries for BRI projects, and then impose conditions mandating that Chinese companies, Chinese materials, and Chinese labor be exclusively used for the construction. This solved China's domestic overcapacity problem, kept its workforce employed, and simultaneously advanced its geopolitical reach by creating dependencies in host countries. The benefits flowed overwhelmingly to Beijing. The most toxic consequence of the BRI model is what has been dubbed debt trap diplomacy. This is a deliberate strategy wherein China extends massive, often non-transparent loans to nations, knowing that the country's fragile economies are highly likely to default on repayment. The loan agreements are typically structured with a terrifying catch. Should the debtor fail to meet its obligations, it must surrender control of key sovereign assets or infrastructure to the Chinese state. These countries are left enslaved by debt, forced to hand over their land or vital facilities, effectively compromising their national sovereignty. The most widely cited and tragic example is the island nation of Sri Lanka. Its leaders were enchanted by the Chinese vision of transforming undeveloped region into a major regional trade hub, rivaling global powerhouses. Sri Lanka already had the functioning Colombo port, a thriving transshipment hub where large container vessels transfer cargo to smaller ships. China convinced the government to build a new deep water port at Hambantota, strategically located on the high-traffic shipping route that connects the Strait of Malacca to the Suez Canal. The new port, named after the former president, was a seductive proposition. The government decided to take a $1.3 billion loan from China for the massive undertaking. The fine print of the loan agreement was a disaster in the making. Firstly, the contract stipulated that only Chinese firms could construct the port. While the interest rate was initially pitched as attractive, the true danger lay in the seizure clause. If the loan could not be repaid, China held the power to take control of the project. Construction was completed, but the Hambantota port became a commercial dud. Initial feasibility studies, if they had been conducted rigorously and independently, would have shown the port was simply not needed in that location. It became a maritime ghost town, seeing a pitiful 30 to 40 ship stopovers in an entire year. With virtually no traffic, there was no revenue, and thus no means to repay the colossal loan. The crisis reached its inevitable climax in 2017. Under the terms of the agreement, Sri Lanka was forced to cede control of the port to a Chinese state-owned enterprise on a devastating 99-year lease. Today, all the port's revenue flows directly to China, a textbook case of a nation losing a critical piece of its economic and territorial sovereignty. Sri Lanka's failure was echoed across the globe. In Africa, the small, landlocked nation of Zambia, an economy heavily dependent on copper exports, also fell into the BRI trap. Zambian leaders seeking to rapidly modernize their economy turned to Chinese loans for numerous projects. The narrative pushed by Beijing was effective. Unlike the IMF and Western countries, whose loans came with tough conditions, focused on transparency and governance, Chinese loans were presented as unconditional. This narrative cleverly obscured the truly dangerous condition, the seizure clause targeting the country's national assets upon default. The cost of this delusion was immense. By 2020, an overwhelming 43% of Zambia's total external debt was owed to Chinese lenders alone. When COVID-19 pandemic hit, global trade, tourism, and most critically, the demand for copper plummeted. Faced with crippling debt and collapsed revenue, Zambia defaulted on its sovereign debt in November 2020. A vibrant, resource-rich nation was financially broken, trapped by the opaque terms of its Chinese loans.
The BRI has also become synonymous with white elephant projects, massive, ostentatious infrastructure that appears grand but provides no practical economic benefit and often leaves a trail of debt and environmental damage. Montenegro, a small nation in Europe, is a stark example. In 2014, it borrowed $1 billion from China to construct the Bar-Bulyar Highway. The planning was abysmal. The project involved cutting through rugged mountains, and the money was exhausted on just a 41-kilometer segment, a road that leads nowhere. The sheer cost of this isolated, non-functional road segment was so immense that it destabilized the country's entire economy. Montenegro's debt ballooned to over 80% of its GDP, forcing it to beg for financial assistance from the IMF and the European Union. The white elephant phenomenon returned to haunt Sri Lanka near the Hambantota port. The Matala Rajapaksa International Airport was built at a cost of $200 million, again, financed by Chinese loans, to encourage regional development. Airlines showed no interest, and the projected passenger traffic never materialized. It earned the infamous title of the world's emptiest airport. Flights are so infrequent that, on occasion, wild elephants and other animals have been spotted wandering across the seldom-used runways, an absurd testament to a project built on reckless ambition rather than sound economics. On the west coast of South America, Ecuador found itself entangled in the BRI web. To address its persistent energy crisis, it partnered with China to build the $2.6 billion Coco-Coto-Sinclair Dam. During construction, Chinese contractors were found to have disregarded fundamental quality standards. Investigations later revealed that officials had been bribed to allow shoddy workmanship. The results have been catastrophic. The dam's walls are now riddled with over 17,000 visible cracks. The project is not only an economic disaster, it stands on the brink of imminent collapse, threatening to unleash a devastating human and environmental crisis on the region. Next came Pakistan, a key strategic partner for China. Through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, valued at $60 billion. Pakistan was promised electricity, jobs, and rapid progress, yet many of the projects have been plagued by delays or outright failures. The local population, particularly in Gwadar, has launched repeated protests against water and power shortages and against the perceived encroachment of Chinese authority. The promised jobs for local residents largely failed to appear, and the national debt burden has mounted alarmingly. The consequence for Pakistan's sovereignty is palpable. The Gwadar port, once under Pakistan's full control, is now managed by China. An astonishing 91% of the port's revenue goes back to the Chinese companies, leaving Pakistan with a mere 9%, a profound strategic and financial loss. The BRI suffered a massive blow to its global standing when Italy, the only G7 nation to have officially joined, announced its intention to withdraw. China had not given Italy direct cash loans, but had signed memorandums of understanding promising substantial Chinese investment and trade deals. However, most of the promised projects failed to materialize, and the economic benefits were minimal. Italy ultimately labeled its participation a big mistake and officially exited the initiative in late 2023. Following Italy's lead, other nations including Malaysia, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Nepal have either canceled or renegotiated several BRI projects, demonstrating a growing global skepticism. In response to China's debt trap strategy and the subsequent global outcry, the United States and Europe have launched competing initiatives. PGII, a U.S.-led program, Global Gateway Program, the European Union's flagship initiative. Both promise transparent, low-interest, and sustainable loans, offering developing nations a credible alternative to the opaque and dangerous Chinese model. Paradoxically, the BRI's challenges have pushed China and Russia closer. Following its invasion of Ukraine, Russia sought to break its diplomatic isolation by strengthening ties with China, utilizing the BRI framework for increased cooperation. This is forging a powerful new geopolitical axis that directly challenges American global dominance, fundamentally altering the global balance of power. After 10 years and the expenditure of trillions of dollars, the Belt and Road Initiative is increasingly being viewed as one of the biggest foreign policy failures in modern history. The reason for its failure is clear. The BRI was fundamentally not about global development, it was about China's national interest. It was designed to export China's industrial overcapacity. It aimed to secure crucial access to raw materials and energy resources globally. It sought to project and expand China's geopolitical power. Moreover, by issuing the majority of its loans in Chinese yuan, it was a deliberate strategy to promote its currency and challenge the hegemony of the US dollar. While other nations suffered losses of sovereignty and crushing debt, did China benefit? The reality is mixed. China's ambition to control the world did not materialize. Instead, the project earned it the international condemnation of debt trap diplomacy. The vast scale of the loans has contributed to the slowing of China's own economy, and Beijing now faces the long-term, expensive liability of managing and operating the failed projects it has seized. However, the BRI has undoubtedly given China a direct or indirect stake in over 100 ports worldwide, a massive and undeniable strategic advantage for its trade economy. If the full network is ever completed, it would create the single longest road, rail, and sea connection from Asia to Europe, theoretically encompassing 65% of the world's population. The cost of the Belt and Road Initiative, to global stability, to national sovereignty, and to China's reputation, is a massive bill still being tallied. We hope this comprehensive analysis has been insightful. Thank you for tuning in to Deep Dive Diaries. Please like and share this video, and we look forward to your valuable comments below. Join us next time for another in-depth feature.